Well, hello again. It's nice to see you. We've had many conversations now. Nice to keep going with it.
I know, and I really look forward to this. But it's a little bit tricky because, I started writing these. Let's see, it's 18 years and six years. I started like writing these books, all of these books, 12 years ago. So I'm having to remember all that stuff, and it's kind of fun when I look back and I think, oh, I forgot that.
Yeah. No, it was longer than that. I think you said it was 18 at one point, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It's been longer than that.
that's when I started. The first one came out 6 years later.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. It's a long time to go back and and that's what I'm going to ask you to do again today, to go to go back and try to remember some of the things. Now, I think it was in the last conversation that you talked a little bit about your interviews with Ron Calhoun, and I think you did share, a couple of the people who were in the stories for that. But let's just kind of fly up to the top of that situation, writing a book in a different genre, because you had come from historical fiction writing, and then all of a sudden this man who you had known for years and was a family friend, he reached out and said, what did he say? He said, can you write my story or something like that?
Yeah, well, I was on the second book of the trilogy, The Loyalist Luck, when he asked me the first time, and I said, "Oh, Ron," I said, "I just can't do that. I'm just too busy right now," and I couldn't even imagine having two books on the go, especially doing a different kind of book. And I knew I was going to have to interview him, and it was going to be a big commitment. So. And then when I had the trilogy finished, he asked me again. And I should maybe say here that Ron Calhoun became a family friend of my mother and dad. And that's how we had this kind of conversation, that we were friends talking. And he said, Elaine, I really would like you to write this. And the second time he asked, I said, yeah, it's a good time, Ron, let's do it. And it took us 2 years. But
Yeah, yeah. So what was it about that? Did you have some initial resistance about writing and working with him, or were you really on for the idea, but you just didn't have time in the beginning? What made you say yes, I think, in the end?
yeah, I wanted to do it. But when he first asked, my head was totally into writing historical fiction, and I had these stories in my head that I wanted to get out. And we were going to forts from 200 years ago, and we were doing all of that kind of stuff. And I was interested in the idea, but I just knew I had to finish the Loyalist books first. So, but then when he asked me a second time, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And he was very easy to work with because I said, now, Ron, there are a couple of things. I said, this book is going to belong to me. And because he had a little tape recorder, we're talking a few years ago before all the wonderful tech we have today. And he said, "Oh no, I can buy that and I can buy that." And I said, "No. Okay, if this is going to belong to me, then it's going to be me that's putting the cost into it and so on." And I just felt that was a fair way to do it. But I also thought in the back of my mind that legally I wanted the ownership of it because I couldn't imagine writing a book and then handing it over to him and not having any control of my work or anything like that. And as you know, I'm a perfectionist and I wanted the final say, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a good thing to mention because a lot of writers wouldn't necessarily think about that ownership piece, or maybe wouldn't have that conversation right off the bat like you did.
Yeah. Well, I think that's only fair, isn't it, to have both sides know what we're doing. But
Yeah. And you
so
had the trust there. I think he trusted you. He asked you to do it. He trusted you.
yeah, and he trusted me and I trusted him. I knew what kind of a man I was dealing with. I wonder these people that writers that write a story for somebody that asks them to write it and so on, they don't really know the person they're writing about. I expect it's a totally different dynamic, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah, because you were personal friends, as you say, and you spent how many hours doing interviews with him? Do you have a sense of how long you said 2 years. How many
Well,
times did you meet?
2 years from start till finish. But in the first year, we would meet maybe once or twice a week for 2 or 3 hours. And you have to realize that this man was, by the time the book came out, he was, we had the launch on his 86th birthday.
Hmm.
So, he would get tired, and I like to be fresh when I do those things too. You don't want to be doing it for a long time. And it's just like going and doing the audiobooks that, you don't want to sign up for a 5-hour session.
No, yeah, it's exhausting for sure, especially when he was older than you, a lot older than you, I think, at the time. Because about what time period was this happening in? You said about this one published 12 years ago. Is that what you just said?
Well, let me just look at this. See, yeah, it was published in 2019.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't that long ago, but yeah, but then he did pass away. But you've got all of this experience and those videos to keep forever now.
And I am, I guess I am that person that looks ahead a bit, and I'm so thankful that I did that because personally and professionally, I think it was a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
there things that you or he found difficult about that process? I mean, yeah, you were working with a real person. It wasn't a historical made up figure like, in the Loyalist series. So was it difficult in surprising ways, or did it just flow smoothly, your work together?
We were so open to each other, and the fact that we knew each other so well, and we were friends, and our son Kevin had worked with Ron, and I mean, because we knew each other, we got into other relationships, and we had all that history. So no, there was never a time that I had any issues with Ron Calhoun at all.
Yeah.
He's not that kind of man. He certainly had the stories, he had the what I needed to get from him and so on, but he was very easy to question. And if I said, "Gee, Ron, I think do you mind if we do such and such?" And I never changed something without discussing it with him, and there were very few changes in that sense at all. But I we just had a really good trusting relationship, and so. I think reading the book, the reader would find that evidence of that relationship. Because when I was writing the words, I had what he said, but then I had to make it into a story, didn't I? And when I was writing the words, I had such a personal respect for the man and what he had done. And he was General Motors Diesel in London. He was vice president of General Motors Diesel. So this man had done a lot of things before. He was a great volunteer in many, many different charities and so on, church and all that stuff. Ron was a man to write about and tell the story of because he was a hero himself.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of Canadians wouldn't know his name because, as the book is titled, I've got it here beside me, the man behind the marathons. So we wouldn't necessarily know his name, but when the Terry Fox exhibit was here in Victoria a number of years ago, he was mentioned in that exhibit. I mean, he was an integral part of not only Terry Fox's marathon, but other things. You briefly talked about John Davidson and Steve Fonyo. Was there another one? I'm missing one. Is there four?
Yeah, yeah, I'm always wanting to forget the other one. Hang on a minute. This is the thing about the memory at this age.
I'm going to show the book while you're doing it because I have it right here.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
yeah,
That's
the man
kind.
behind the marathons.
Oh, there it is. Ken McComb. And when we get to talking about that, Ken McComb was a blind man who went across Canada.
Right.
So that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, amazing stories of those people he was working with and then himself, as you say, too. It's a fascinating read from all those perspectives. But I
Yeah.
think that I remember at the time, because Ron was wonderful and also a real human being, there were tough things that happened in his life and with his family members and so on. And you had to kind of navigate that road a little bit, right? Because his people,
Yeah,
the people in his life were also still alive and you want to be respectful. And can you say anything about that?
I can. And I was just looking up the index here. Part one was, I called it Somewhere the Hurting Must Stop. And that's what Terry Fox said in the letter that he sent to the Canadian Cancer Society in prior to 1980. And then part two was, I called it Four Different Marathons. And in there I had Steve Wagno, who had a Journey for Lives. And Steve was a totally different um, person than Terry Fox. And so that's an interesting story because Ron had to deal with this man who had a number of problems himself, but still, the bottom line was he went across his country, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and did his best to earn money for the Cancer Society. And then the one I mentioned, Ken McComb, he was a blind man, and that's not going to come to my mind exactly why he was, but he had another disease that he got blind, or he became blind from. And he was quite an interesting story because he was difficult for Ron to work with, and so that's very interesting. And then the last one that he did was in 1998 and 99, and 3 years before that, 1995. There were two things with John and Jesse Davidson. And they came and they asked Ron. They want to meet him, and but John Davidson and his son Jesse lived in London with their family, and Jesse Davidson had Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and John got the idea to push Jesse in his wheelchair across Ontario. And he wanted Ron Calhoun to run it to do for Jesse's journey what Ron had done for the Marathon of Hope. And by the way, both of those titles of the journeys were Ron wrote them. He was a very literary man and he was good with words. Takes one to know one, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and then part three, I did the Calhoun Marathon, and that was more telling people about his life and so on. And he did have a lot of things that happened to him. Uh, I don't know how far we want to get into this, but in London, Ontario, where Springbank Park is. That is where Ron was born on his grandfather's farm, and his parents had a small house on the farm as well. And I was just looking at that this morning, and his parents' small house didn't have enough bedrooms. There were three children, and so the two boys slept in the big house with the grandfather at night, and then they had the meals and so, like they lived there together, but they lived in two different houses, you know.
Yeah.
So I
That's neat.
thought that was kind of cool. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And you said that, you'd agreed with Ron at the beginning that you would own the book and so on. And did he give you carte blanche to just write what you heard from him? Was he concerned? Like how did you navigate those hard pieces? Because some of those stories were hard to tell, and maybe there were some stories you chose not to tell as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, like all of us, we never know these children that we have. We never know. We never know what our brothers and sisters are going to do, and you know, those are family stories, and that is families. And both Ron and I agreed that we didn't want to denigrate anyone, and,
Yeah.
and so, and even today, I'm not going to say to you what the specific things were, because
No.
those people are. excuse me, most of those people are still alive. And,
Yeah,
and Ron would not want me to do that. But there were things, and we just talked it over and we
yeah,
agreed, excuse me.
yeah. Every family has, stories, doesn't it? And doesn't mean they all have to go into a book, but it sounds like you found your way together.
Well, I said to him early on, I said, Ron, I don't know how you feel about this, but I said, I know a lot of people look for the dirt to put in a book so it will sell. I said, that's not who I am. And we had the discussion, and I said, you can tell me anything you want, and then we'll talk about whether it goes in the book or not. And you have the last word.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like you had some good conversations just about the way forward, really, even in the beginning. But
Oh
again,
yeah.
goes back to that trust piece too. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I was so glad that I did this. I learned so much more about the man, and I came to love him and respect him so much more because his life wasn't that easy. And
yeah,
it's always good for us to look back and see what other people have gone through, people that we know now, or my book Maggie that we'll talk about one day, and that turned out to be about my grandmother's early life. She was born in 1890, and to find out those types of things, everybody has those stories. You just have to go looking for them, I guess.
yeah, yeah. But I think I remember you saying, to correct me if I'm wrong, did it make you want to write more? I think it's creative nonfiction, isn't it? What you did with this book about Ron, like, did you want to do it more for other people? Was it a genre you really loved as you kind of floated up to the top and looked back at that genre, writing that genre, or did you think, no, that was good, move on to something else?
Yeah, it wasn't really my thing, but I like I've got 8 books out, and if I look at every one of those 8 books, the thing that turns me on and gets me excited about them is writing about people with the strength and the ability to push through the bad times and the terrible situations that they might find themselves in, and do something amazing.
Yeah, and that takes us, I mean, nice segue because I think we're going to talk about your book, Brave New World, next. And it was full of stories like that, right?
Oh, yeah. And I just, you know, um, I'm that girl that went to 4-H and their motto is learn to do by doing.
Yeah,
And I realize now, when you get white hair, you get a few things that come to you and that as lessons that you've learned over your life. And what I've learned is that 4-H and the motto and the things we did and the wonderful community leaders who led our groups and so on. They did such a good job of modeling good behavior, teaching us things. I got so much out of both 4-H homemaking club and can you believe it? This non-farmer girl raised on a farm but never wanted to do that. I was in 4-H calf club.
yeah.
You
That does
know?
amaze me, knowing you.
I know it's hard to believe, but I learned so much from it, and part of that was about getting along with people and listening to other people and so on. You just don't know what those young experiences do for you, do you?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you've mentioned 4-H before, so I know it was pivotal. And if everyone's watched all of the videos, you're gonna know it was pivotal for Elaine here because you've mentioned it before.
Yeah, well, and I don't think it hurts to, if it comes up in a conversation, it just underlines my point that there are things in your life that happen whether you wanted them to or not. And if you keep mentioning them, then you realize how pivotal they were.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, sometimes you don't see it at the time, maybe often, right? You see it looking back and go, whoa, that was a real sliding doors kind of moment or something that you did or took a course or
I like
experience.
that expression, a real sliding doors moment. I've never heard that
Yeah.
before. Are
Well,
you
it's not
making your
mine.
own?
No, not mine. It's a thing. I think there was a movie maybe called Sliding Doors. It's like the choices that we make, right? The things that we do and take us in different directions. So if you never went to 4-H, right? Maybe you would have had a completely different life. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But let's go back. And I think I missed the first word because your book's not in front of me. Canada, colon, Brave New World, I think is what it's called, right? I missed the Canada piece in there before. She's got it. Oh, that's good. Because I always think of the Brave New World piece.
And
So tell me
I,
about,
I think my cover designer did a wonderful job of designing this cover.
yeah, I love the colors in this one. So
Yeah.
this is an anthology full of stories. Explain what this is and why you went into the anthology genre.
Well, I like learning new things. I guess I have the kind of brain that gets bored easily, and so and you know, in our family discussions and stuff, we always come up with ideas and so on. And your father and I mean, we do the same thing still now, and we're getting old, you know. But that's what turns me on. So I got this idea. I've been in a couple of anthologies as a writer. And I just got this idea that maybe it would be kind of fun to write to put out an anthology. So what I did was I have about 1,500 people on my mailing list, and I know a lot of people. And I thought, well, let's see what happens. So I put out a call for submissions, and I basically said that I wanted it to be stories about people who had to leave their home country and came to Canada, and how hard it was to do both those things, because coming to Canada as a new country and so on, even today, coming to any new country and leaving your family and everything you've ever known is a major thing. So
Yeah.
I was really interested in that theme, and I put out a call, and I got wonderful stories from people. And then I knew some of the stories. So 7 of the stories in the book I wrote. And what I did for those was I would go and interview the people. And the reason I wrote them is I knew their story. I knew them personally. And like you know, family member Steve Van Winden, and maybe I shouldn't say his name there, but anyways, he wouldn't mind. And his dad was in Holland during the Second World War, and Holland had a terrible time. The Germans were the aggressors at that point, and they walked into Holland and they took over the country. They took all the farmers' crops and they sent them back to Germany, and the people in Holland were absolutely starving. I mean, it was terrible, and there was so much destruction of one kind and another that when the war was over, that went on and on. Well, Steve's father lived through that. And so Steve and I got in the car and we went to visit his dad. And Steve came with me because he knew a lot of the stories, and his father was at the age where he was forgetting some of it. So we recorded it. I love my iPhone because I don't think I'm particularly techie anymore, but I loved the record thing on there, because you just set it on the table, push the button, and away you go. And there's nothing techie that gets in the way or anything. And and then I had it transcribed so that I could work with more easily and so on. Um,
I
but
bet that was a special experience for Steve too, because you did it together and that was his father, and maybe he learned some things too that he didn't know yet.
he did, and but he was very helpful, just prompting, I should say, prompting his father when he would forget things and so on. It was a wonderful experience. But that's what I did, and then I went to see when I was a child. Um, my dad and another friend of his, 2 farmers, got people to come from Holland through the church. There was some kind of a program or something, And of course, Holland was going through, I should say the Netherlands. It's really the Netherlands, and Holland is part of it.
Yeah.
But, but anyways, they got these two people to come, and oh, sorry, that's a different program. He did this a couple of times. But anyways, the man that Dad got first was Aaron, was his name, and I'll just give his first name. But Aaron and Jenny came when I was about 5 years old, and they lived in our house. And you got to realize this is in the early 50s, and everybody's, recovering from the wartime, and it was such a growth period and so on, but they were growing from not having very much. So he and his wife and their two little boys lived in the uh, two bedrooms upstairs, and there was a bathroom there. It didn't have an actual sink in it. It had a tap, and so they would run the dishpan under the tap and get water or whatever they needed for cooking. And they had a hot plate to cook on. Like, this was not wonderful stuff, but these people were so glad to have a chance. And I think my parents were pretty good to them. And they had many more children. I can't remember how many children they had. And eventually they uh, moved out and into another house. And my dad had a couple of other pieces of land with homes on them and so on by that time. And and then they bought their own and so on. But it's such a story. It's a happy story because, of course, they would have had problems and so on, but they left that country that was in such a bad position at that point, and there were no jobs. And so I went out, and Joyce, your aunt, my sister, came with me, and we went to visit Martin, the oldest child in that family. He was a wee little boy when they came from Holland. He was probably about 2 or 3.
Mm.
And he remembered things that I didn't remember, and I remembered things that he didn't remember. So it was so much fun. So I wrote that story, and then I showed it to Martin so he could see if I'd made any errors or anything. And he was fine. I always did that when I wrote somebody's story. I always got them involved in it before I published it because I wanted to make sure I hadn't made any mistakes or offended, or you just don't know
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. 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 Some people wouldn't do that, but it was important to you to do it. You'd hate to publish a book and then get it wrong, or
Yeah.
yeah, or as you say, offend someone. So some of it was a personal journey. Others were submitted to you. And I think you mentioned Rudy before, just briefly, but he already was an author and then
Yeah.
contributed something to this one. You want to say
Yes.
more about that?
Well, I'd love to talk about that because he makes, I mean, all these stories are wonderful, don't get me wrong. But Rudy, when I was growing up and we would watch television, we had a television before anybody else that I knew in my school. And so we had this television and only one channel, but they would portray the Germans as being kind of buffoonery, and they didn't portray them fairly at all, and that would be left over from the war. And of course, that was what Hitler did to Germany and the rest of the world, really. But anyhow, so when I was a child, I just didn't have a very good opinion. Well, in the London Writers Society, I met this wonderful man, uh, much older than I, and I got to know him, and he was a boy in a young boy in the 1940s when the war was on and Hitler took over. And Rudy's father did not want. Well, Rudy's father had like a bakery cafe type thing, and it was very popular. And the Nazis wanted, they would come and they'd have meetings there, or they'd have some kind of a social thing there. And they wanted Rudy's father to put a sign up on the store that this was the official meeting place of the Nazi party or whatever. And Rudy's father would not do it.
Mm.
And Rudy's father was 38 years old. And I mention that because the Nazis sent him, they conscripted him into the military, and they sent him to with the army to Russia, and we're talking, cold, horrible, horrible conditions. They didn't feed them well or anything, and they wanted him to be cannon fodder. That
Mm.
this is what they wanted to happen. Well, Rudy's father was kind of bright, and he was a baker, and he knew a lot about food preparation and stuff, and he could see that his outfit was falling apart because they didn't have proper food, and so he went to the powers that be locally and said, I can fix this for you. Well, then he became very popular, as you might
Mhm.
imagine.
Yeah.
And so he found his way and managed to live through the war. He was 4 years without seeing his family or his wife, and she had three children at home, and the baby was born after he left. So
Mm-hmm.
imagine the thing. So that,
Yeah.
to me,
These
an
are the type of
amazing.
stories.
It,
Yeah.
it, it was an amazing story because growing up, I'd always had this, you know, propaganda sort of image
Yeah.
of what this was like. And here was two people, um, Rudy's father and mother, and oh, I don't have the book here. Martel was his name, which is German for Marty, I guess, or Martin. And her name was something else that won't come into my mind right now. And Hannah, that was her name. So Rudy wrote, after he came, he got through the war, and he ended up coming to Canada, and his brother and sister both came to Canada, and they were very smart people. He ended up as a prof at Fanshawe College, and he wrote all these math textbooks that filled the gap between old math and new math. We used to talk about new math, but apparently what was going on is that when these kids would get to colleges or university, they didn't know the right math because the teachers were never trained in the new math, and they didn't know it. And so they just kept teaching the old stuff and passing them and doing all this stuff. So they'd get to the college and they wouldn't know it. So Rudy said to the powers that be at Fanshawe, he said, well, he said, I can do this for you. And he wrote textbooks, and he sold them around the world, actually, in two or three countries. So
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
is not a
This
stupid.
is you can have a whole lifetime's worth of stories just about Rudy, it sounds like, right?
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. But you know what?
well,
If I can jump in, I want to take us back to writing a little bit, but I'm thinking about the links between the different genres that you started with, right? Like you had historical fiction, and then I think creative nonfiction anthology, and to hear you talk about it, it really makes me think this was lifelong learning stuff, right? Like
oh,
you
absolutely.
do
We
you do
had
you
to think
think,
about that, didn't
you
we?
know, didn't don't do you think that's why you chose these genres? Like did you choose it because you were always learning something from these people? The
It just felt
history.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it interested me. And you mentioned creative nonfiction, and I didn't say in there the reason that I called the Calhoun book creative nonfiction is that I did make up certain things. Like I had the
Yeah.
conversation between Ron and Fran as they were driving the van back across the country after Terry Fox had to stop his run and so on, and so I knew them so well that I made up what the conversation might have been in certain situations, and so that's why I called it creative nonfiction.
Yeah. I think that's right. I don't, not an expert, of course, but I just asked ChatGPT about it. What's the difference between biography and creative nonfiction? And I think you're right that because you put dialogue in and you used storytelling techniques and you didn't just say these are the facts of Ron's life and the things he did, I think it is that genre of creative nonfiction. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is there something else you want to ask me about Canada Brave New World?
Yeah, I mean, in this one, you really were navigating the line between editor, because that's, what you do when you put together an anthology, isn't it? You're really more of on the editor side, but you wrote some of the stories too. Was going into that editor role unique in any way for you? Did you stumble? Was it, did you learn things being the editor, but also as well as the author in that one?
I've always had the opinion that every course I've ever taken over my whole life, and I include the sewing course where I learned embroidery when I was a young mother, and I went to night school and took that. Every course I have ever taken has helped me in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I found in this, that I was able to slip into the other genre fairly easily because I don't know, I guess I always just really liked learning new things, and these
Yeah.
with the web and so on. I mean, you could go on and you can find out things. And of course, this is before Chat GPT and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if a person wanted to, you could get the computer to write the whole thing. Of course, I never wanted to, because the fun for me is
Yeah.
finding a good way to say that. Or, sometimes you just write something and you think, oh my gosh, I love the way those words came.
Maybe
Have
that's
you
what,
experienced that?
well, Stephen King called them your darlings, right? Of course, I think famously he said sometimes you've got to kill those darlings, but yeah, sometimes you see a sentence or write it and go, oh, I really like how that worked out, and it can be
Yeah.
self-serving.
And of course, King is right, and I would never even think to correct him at all. But the thing is that my darlings are finding a fresh way of saying something rather than the old thing. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
if it still adheres to the reason that you like to write, the reason people like to read your books and so on, and if you're still, all those things, like I think I might have talked about getting to the end of a paragraph and don't just tell everything that like
right.
let
Yeah,
the
you have
reader
mentioned.
think,
Yeah,
if
yeah. Well, you mentioned courses, like you never took a course in how to edit a book, how to edit an anthology, but you had been part of one, you said. So did you figure it out as you went along? Like we've already established you had English skills in many respects, right? You taught it. So
yeah.
how did the editing role land for you?
Well, the editing role was kind of natural because I taught school, taught English, taught senior high school English for 25 years. And I went back after I had my French degree, and I went back and I worked away on more and more English courses and so on. I think I was like 1 credit short of having a second degree in that, something like that. And so that was not hard for me. Um, I did use an editor for my first book. And when it came back, like I had done this so much, this is what I had spent
Yeah.
my life doing. And I taught the senior grades, and I was always trying to help my students say what they wanted to say,
Hmm.
create the effect they wanted to create. And that's why teaching English, if you do it right, is very taxing, because
Yeah.
you're just thinking all the time and thinking, how could we get this across so that it's good writing, but gets the message across? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of that goes on. When you're writing your books.
Well, I mean, and I guess similar to when you were a high school teacher, when you wrote slash edited Canada Brave New World, other people wrote a lot of those stories, and you had to then work with them to polish them or something. Like, was it, did you come up with against anything there? Was that not everyone is the same kind of writer or the same quality of writer? Was it challenging in any way?
Well, I really put on the hat of editor, and I don't think that an editor's job is to put it into their own vernacular, for want of a better word.
Words. That's a good example, actually.
Yeah, here I go. See, I do like words. But I don't think that's your job as an editor. I think it's to help the person, help the writer say what they want in a way that works. And if it works, it intrigues the reader and the reader turns the page. You
Mhm.
keep going. And a friend of mine once told me that, the job of a cover is to get the person standing in the store to open the book.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the job. And that's the job of the writer, is to get the person to turn the page and keep going
Yeah.
and love it. And we've all read the books where we go, oh my gosh. Well, I went on a writing course once, and I won't tell you who or whatever, but you get some wonderful courses that you take, and then you get some that are not so. And I went on this course, and it's always interesting because when they force you to buy their book before you've even seen them or done anything, a little caveat there. I think it should be caveat emptor, buyer beware, because I went on this course, and I got this guy from the States who came across to Niagara Falls, and it was a lovely course, and so many good things happened from that. But his book was, I can't even tell you what it was about now. It was so awful. It just, you just think, oh, and so the students are all talking about his book, and we're all saying, oh my God.
I guess it worked against him that he asked or forced you all to buy the book when it wasn't a great one. Oh, yikes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I forget why I started down that. Did I answer your question?
I don't remember now what my question was. Usually I have my finger on the pulse of this, but I think I lost
I
it.
wonder if it's heredity. Hereditary.
Yeah, what were we talking about? Let me see if
I
I
don't
can get
know.
us back on track. I mean, so we're talking about genre, we're talking about you learning new things, you're learning the editing role, but I guess where you were going and what you were saying was around um your role was to help shape the story, but not recraft the story into something you would have written, those ones that were submitted.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
I think we'll
and
get
I
us back on
should
track.
say there was only maybe one or two submissions that I had to do anything to. Most of them were excellent, and if I did have to do that, then I would send it back to the person and say, this is what I'm going to publish. Is there anything I've missed or something like that? I really didn't want them to tell me they didn't like it, but nobody did.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were all happy. So I was very fortunate that way. And I think it's a wonderful book from the point of view of recording some of our Canadian history.
Yeah, and the history of families as well, because how many people's stories were in that in Brave in Canada Brave New World?
I think about 27 or something like that, somewhere around that. And
Yeah, I mean it's stuff that doesn't get recorded, right? There are some people that specialize in this and they help families write down their history, but it maybe doesn't happen as often as it should. So it's a real gift, not only for you, right? It sounds like you enjoyed the process, but did you get any feedback from the families themselves about?
both loved them. And then, I'm ever the marketer. Oh, it was the best book launch I ever had. Um,
Yeah,
it was so much fun. And I had the first story in the book I wrote, and it's about the Vietnamese family that I taught in 1980 when they came from Vietnam and they had to get out of there because the communists took over. And I met Nia and Hong, and lifelong friends, not close friends, but we kept in touch over the years. And I had to tell their story
Mhm.
because people of my age, we lived through the Vietnam War, and we heard all the stories. And every night on TV, they would show in the news segment, and they would show the caskets coming off the planes.
Mhm.
As the American boys were coming back in cat,
Wow. Yeah.
and you can see it's still in my brain. So I wanted to tell a happy story, and it is a happy story. That young couple, it wasn't easy for them, but they brought and you had to sponsor people to bring them over here. The churches and the Canadian government and so on sponsored the initial people and so on. But when they got here, if they wanted to bring their family or whatever, they had to sponsor them. I don't know what the cost was, but these people had nothing.
Mhm.
But Nia and Hong, and Nia is his name. Most of us Canadians we wouldn't know, but Nia and Hong sponsored 40 members of their family in
Yeah.
in Vietnam to come here, and there's hardly anybody of their family left in Vietnam.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? And talk about memories. I mean, I remember being in the classroom when you taught that class, right? Because it wasn't in the basement of the Norwich
Yeah,
Public Library, and I was just little, but it must have
yeah,
been impactful because why would I remember kind of that the scene? You have a visual scene in your head of being in there,
yeah.
and yeah,
Well, they thought that you and Kevin were amazing, and that was 1980. So Kevin was 10 and you were 7.
yeah, yeah.
I
So
just told your age.
impactful for all of us, right? And how lucky and just sort of, I mean, you made it happen that you were able to integrate their story into that book, but you learned all these other stories as well and were able to help people tell them. So yeah, really
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, and it
Uh,
and it brought about us meeting again, and they run a store in Tilsonburg, and when I went in the store, and Hong just threw her arms around me, and
uh,
I threw my arms around her, and we had all those years before, you know, uh,
yeah,
so
yeah,
those memories last.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So
As we, oh, go ahead.
things happen to you, and you never know. Like I thought that'd be kind of a fun thing to do. I think, were in kindergarten, so I was kind of getting to the point where I wanted to be doing more again. Like I stayed home from teaching. I didn't teach for the 8 years so that you and Kevin were kids at home, and so I found this to do, and I think it helped me as much as it helped those young people who
Mm,
had, they were uprooted from their lives and so on. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, powerful. As we come to a close on our conversation about different genres, do you have any final words for folks who are trying to write in these, particularly these two genres? We're going to talk about another couple next, but about creative nonfiction and anthology. Any final words of wisdom?
Well, I just think we're so lucky today because when I first started this writing journey, I went to the library and the librarians were wonderful and they would get me this from this library and they were so good. They're so knowledgeable. But as time has gone on, over 18 years, what's happened in the technology world? There's so much out there that can help you. So if you have any idea of doing this, don't be afraid.
Hmm.
There's all kinds of help out there. Um, and don't be afraid to say no. I don't know. Did I tell a story? I did, didn't I, about the fella who told me the first 100 pages of my book were
Yeah.
kind of crap. Well, some people would let that stop them, but there again, learn to do by doing,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
you certainly did. Yeah, with these are just two of the 8 books that you've written, but definitely learning experiences and successes both.
Yeah, yeah. And that's another thing that we could talk about sometime. What is success? You know, to me, my success in my own mind might be different than another writer's success because I have a very good friend who, like I'm a retired teacher, so I don't have any financial problems. Um, but my other friend who's a wonderful writer and has a number of books, so she has to keep doing this because it's her livelihood.
Right. Yeah, different goals, right? Different needs
Yeah, yeah.
that writers would have.
So I've had the freedom to, you know, do the things that made my heart sing.
Oh, that's nice. Well, let's end it there and we'll talk again about the ones that came after this in different genres. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, thanks, Beth.